Hello there, in London again today. Exmouth Market, place I regularly come to because it has some very good lunchtime and breakfast spots. There's Morrow over there, nice place to have a lunch. Anyway, I'm currently at Gale's, which is a little kind of breakfast place, buns and coffee, and look what I'm looking at. That's the Church of Our Most Holy Redeemer, which is a Catholic church, designed in an Italian style, 1888, so late Victorian. And we're using A3 piece of paper. It's a Royal Talens A3, and it's got a grey tone to it. Very nice paper, the Royal Talens. I tend to use this and the Clairefontaine predominantly in terms of tonal, because their tonal papers are very calm and decently smooth and friendly. I don't know, there's something about papers, when you try different papers, there's certain papers which feel good under the pen, under the brush, and certain ones, maybe it's because they're too fibrous, they just don't feel right. You know, they don't feel comfortable in the hand, if that makes any kind of sense. And if you're the kind of person who likes to try different kinds of paper out, then it does make sense. Now, I've not started with the pencil guidelines here. I tend to vary. Sometimes I'll use a pencil, sometimes I won't. It depends on how brave I am feeling. So I like the challenge of just going in straight. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. In fact, you know me, of course it's going to be wrong, because how could you ever draw something like this accurately with a brush without any sort of setup, without any guidelines at all. So of course it's going to be wrong, and that's part of the freedom of doing it. That by doing it in this very immediate way, it's a true sketch, and obviously you're not expecting anything like precision. What you're expecting is to do the best you can, and it's an interesting challenge, as I say. And if there are mistakes, I've already made a little tiny mistake where the width of the campanile, the bell tower, and the relationship to the gabled end there's a little gap where I'm imagining there could be sky, and there actually isn't in my view, and it was just a simple little mistake. So I end up having to extend the facade of where you see the stripes to kind of, here we go, I'm extending that out now, in order to kind of correct, because I think I originally wanted there to be a space there because it looked nice, and in reality there wasn't from where I was sitting. So I guess I'm being honest, which is unusual for me. Normally I might say, well, if it looks better, I'll draw it the way I want it to look better. Now I'm using two things of interest here. I've got a wide flat brush. This is 30 millimeters wide, so over an inch and a quarter nearly, and it's super flat. It's a DaVinci spin, so it's really not often used for painting. It's a kind of brush you might use for varnishing or something like that. The benefit of it is it takes a lot of ink, in this case, or a lot of paint, and it can create lines and squares, as you can see me doing. And this is really, for me, a sketch drawn with a paintbrush. It's not a painting. And I think if you see the way the brush is moving, you'll understand why I think that. Because I'm very concerned with the angle of the brush, in terms of, I know where I want the line to be, or the block to be. So the brush is continuously spinning in my hand in order to get the angles to relate to either the perspective or the particular detail that I'm trying to indicate. So you may ask, what's the benefit of using something like this? And it's there in front of you, it's speed. Because with one sort of dab of this brush, I can do an entire block, I can do an entire window, I can do a shadow. That the whole thing has a very immediate, very kind of energetic quality to it. Now I'm using an ink, which is a calligraphy ink, which is an intense colour, and I've watered it down so it isn't sort of over powerful. So it becomes more shadow-like. And my intention always was to go in then with an acrylic pen of a similar intensity blue, in order to do what the big brush isn't going to do. Now I could theoretically have used a thinner brush, but I think part of the joy of the way I see this process is layering and variation. It's allowing different tools to achieve different effects. I'll give you an example. There are people I know who can sit and do a drawing with an ink pen, and only an ink pen. So it'll be like a black and white drawing, ink pen, line drawing, shading, hatching, all that stuff. And I kind of go, wow, that's incredible. And I could never do that, and I would never want to do that, because there's just like a different skill. It's different in my head. For me, part of the pleasure of this is to mix your medium. It's to mix the tools you use, because by mixing the medium, you kind of refresh yourself every few minutes. When you pick up a different tool, your brain just changes gear, and you suddenly start thinking in a different way, and the hand moves differently, and it keeps the whole process alive in your head, keeps it fresh, keeps it interesting, keeps you guessing a little bit, because it's not always guaranteed to work. It's not always, if you don't allow the ink to dry, or if the ink dries too fast, or if the pens have run out a bit, or whatever it might be, there are lots of things that may get in the way, but that's all, again, part of the fun of it, because I stress this every time, it's just a sketch. I'm not drawing this for some kind of professional outcome. If I was employed by the people who run the Church of the Most Holy Redeemer, I've got to get that name right, then I would take days, and I would do it in the studio, and I would be a completely different drawing at the end. But that's not what this is. I'm literally having a cheese croissant and a flat white, which is a coffee, and I'm 40 minutes maybe, while I'm munching with one hand and drawing with the other. And the table you see is the Gales table I'm sitting at, and the ivy you see is the bush that Gales put out to sort of divide their seating areas up. So, thank you, Gales, by the way. Not that I asked permission, but I hope you don't mind. That sense of immediacy, that sense of the drama, you'll see me go into a different colour pen, and I don't know whether those two blues and this kind of stony peach colour, I don't know how well they're going to work until I lay them down. It's not that I've swatched it, it's not that I know precisely enough about how these colours work that I can guarantee their kind of balance. But what I can guarantee is this won't be the only pen. It won't just be the two colours. It'll end up being 3 and 4 and 5, because that's where the layering creates a level of success, a level of visual complexity, which triggers the mind to see some sort of enrichment, something visually interesting. And for me, that's a game, I suppose. You want the person looking at the image, me predominantly, to say there is complexity there, even though I know, when you can see how sort of quickly the hand is moving, although of course this footage has been sped up slightly just so you don't have to sit through the whole drawing, but the hand doesn't rest. I've got a pen in my hand, and I'm going to go bang, 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 bang through as much of this drawing as possible in a kind of, I don't want to say robotic, because that makes it sound mechanical, doesn't it? But in a completely driven way, because ultimately I know where I want that colour to be, and that colour doesn't do any good in the pen. That colour needs to be on the paper, and it needs to be in the right position. And if it's not in the right position, we'll work with it somehow. You do make mistakes when you do drawings like this, and I know where all those mistakes are. Well, I hope so anyway. And most other people, if they were to spend 2 minutes looking at it with a critical eye, they could also find errors in the perspective or inaccuracies in some way. But the majority of people don't look like that. They just look and say, oh, look at that drawing, look at that church, or look how interesting that style looks and how energetic. They're not looking to criticize. They're not looking to find fault. They're looking to enjoy your creative output. So, well done them and well done us. Over my time, I often get asked, always get asked, sort of recommendations for pens and things. And often when it comes to acrylic pens, which I've only really been using for a year or two, I get asked kind of which acrylic pen brand, because there's lots of brands. And my ultimate point has been, well, it's enjoyable to try different brands, because some of them are subtly different from each other, and not in a way that's ever negative. None of the brands I have I would consider to be poor brands in any way. They're all the pens work well. And I started with the Arrtx brand. This is an Arrtx pen you see me using now. Super reliable, lovely pens. And I've tried Poscas, and I've tried the Yoo-hoo-hoos, however you pronounce it. But currently, I'm looking at the Tooli-Arts. Now, I've had Tooli-Arts for since the beginning, but I've only had the fine nib ones. And just recently I invested in some brush nibs. Now they have a pro range, which has got a whole range of sets, which are sort of all of the greens and blues and all of the flesh colors and stuff like that. And it's kind of clearly not designed for anybody to buy, you know. It's not like a general set for general people. It's like 20 greens, 20 blues. It's kind of like cool. It's like set up for people who understand the value of having that level of color precision. So I did buy just one box of the flesh colors because I thought the flesh colors were an interesting kind of thing I could use. These, and you can see the colors I'm using here, these kind of browns and what I call a peach. They're all from their I think they call them skin colors, and they're a really interesting pen. They're really quite nice in the hand. They're thinner than the Arrtx pens, and I don't know. They're just interesting. So it's possible that at some point I may well just, if I ever was to become a single brand kind of person, maybe Tooli-Art, because they haven't let me down in the slightest yet. And while we're there, I always get asked about white pens. In fact, there's whole YouTube videos about white pens. It seems to be one of those things that's very hard to get. And I've gone through many white pens trying to find ones. And without really over analyzing it, this kind of Aurobliss pen, I bought sort of 3 or 4 of them, and it's the one I always find in my bag. It's the one that doesn't let me down. I've tried lots that have dried, or when I say dry, the nib kind of stops that immediacy in the flow and just becomes a bit unresponsive. Whereas this just keeps on going. So again, I'm not in the position of recommending anything to anybody yet, but I find this is the one I put in my bag every time because it doesn't let me down, or at least it hasn't yet. Now I'm using a style which you will have noticed, a little unusual but kind of interesting. I don't use it every time, but there are certain subjects which kind of suit it. And that style is that kind of fast series of dots. When you're doing something which is decorative, bricks, tiles, repetitive, rhythmic, but decorative somehow. And it's all kinds of things it works for, and it comes down to a series of marks which are the same as each other, laid down very fast, so that they have a bit of movement to them. They're not precise, but they are like a chain of rhythm. And you'll see it in the clock tower, or not clock tower, but the bell tower. You'll see it in the gabled end of the church, that this kind of, I would call it kind of staccato, that kind of da-da-da-da-da-da kind of touch with the pen generates something in the eye afterwards. If we look at it now, it seems very contrived because it's, that line isn't dot dash in reality. Why are you doing dots? Because there's something I see within that brickwork that I want to reproduce in a way that's very immediate, that's basically super fast. And by doing this kind of overlay of dottiness, if that's a word, then I think the viewer picks up on that. The viewer doesn't, again, look at it and say, but why are there dots there? They just pick up on this level of decorative grid. At least I hope they do. It's only when you analyze it, only when we talk about it now, that it becomes slightly odd. I think before that, it just seems part of the style of the look. And you can enhance that. I mean, you'll see as we go through that I add this kind of dottiness to things like the tree and to the sky, so that, again, that enhances the sense that this is a stylistic decision. It's not responding to something that's there in the sky or there in the tree. Although I suppose you could argue leaves could be shown that way, but you get my point. It's a way of carrying on the style outside of the building in a way that gives it a sort of connection, a sort of harmony with other parts of the space. And one of the eternal questions with drawings like this is how much of the paper, the core paper, how much of that do you leave? And it's always a balance, and I rarely think I get it right, because I really wish I could leave more paper. I just enjoy the act of laying down colour so much that I often will overdraw, as in draw over the top of, my previous lines and on top of the color of the background tone itself. I'd like to have 10-20% visible, and often I think it's less than that. And I think there's a sort of game to be played, because often, as a sort of get out of jail card thing, which is a Monopoly reference, it'll just be the sky. So the sky will be the color of the paper. But I wish I could be more courageous and leave more. I tend to make my courage in just crazy color choices. Crazy, in the sense that, for example, you'll see me do the tree, and the tree had this interesting red blossom on it. And so I'm literally using the closest I have, and it's exactly the same color I'll then use on the brickwork. And in my eyes, I'm thinking that's useful because that'll be a color connection. Those bricks and that tree will become friends. And a lot of people would look at it and think, oh my God, I haven't got the right color pen or the right color paint, and be worried that the lack of color accuracy to what you see is going to be a problem. And I see it as it's going to be a benefit. Now, whatever way that works, I will always see it as being a benefit. Even if I had 25 reds and I could do every single thing a different red, I'd think, that's a benefit as well. The point is, I want to see everything as a benefit. I don't want to see any of this as being any kind of negativity, because, what's the point in that in your life? You don't need it, especially not when you're sketching. You get enough negativity when you go to work and speak to your manager. You don't need negativity from your pen, Your pen is your friend, and your drawing is your creative output, and the whole thing is on your side, 100%. So nothing it can do is ever going to be disrespecting you or your process. The drawing is always your biggest fan, which is quite a nice way of seeing it now. I've said it like that. I'll make a t-shirt with that on. But I mean it, drawings are like something you've, it'd be too much if I say birthed, wouldn't it? But you've made them, and they're kind of, it's like if you have a child, you have to believe in it, and it will believe in you without any question. It's there for you, and you're there for it. Although I shouldn't say it when it comes to kids, should I? But you know what I mean. So it isn't a question of you doubting yourself, or because in a way, by doubting yourself, you're doubting this thing you've produced. And that's not appropriate. That's not what we're going to be doing. Now, a word on colour. This is blue and orange, isn't it? Blue and orange on that lovely quiet tan, sort of stony colour, really pop. And you can see I have a set of colours here, but I'm actively wanting to use just the same blue for the sky as for the building, the same orange for the tree as for the brick. It's really trying to create a limited set of choices in order to ensure a harmony, and really allowing the kind of intensity of the colours to do 90% of the impact. And you can see it kind of works. And it's really about immediacy and speed. Again, it's about not wanting to spend too long doing it, because the more time you take, the more precious it becomes, the less of a sketch it becomes, the more of an illustration it becomes, the more art it becomes. I don't mind doing a 5-hour painting in oil that's, a big piece. But if I'm going to do a sketch, I have to do it in under an hour, because otherwise, what's the world for? There's other things to do in your life. It's only a sketch, for heaven's sake. So getting it kind of bashed out is all part of the game. And having a sort of limited palette choice is also part of that same game. It's part of the joy of it. And I think it's to be encouraged, quite honestly. I don't go out with 3 pens in my pocket. I'll take 20, 25 pens. But there'll always be, 2 blues and 3 reds or whatever, or warms. And I'll often just be using a couple of those for any one of the drawings. The difference for me is if I do 2 drawings in a day, I don't want the second drawing to be the same as the first. So if I did just put a couple of pens in my top pocket and stroll off somewhere and a couple of sheets of paper, I would be forced to repeat because of the nature of the limited tools I had. And that's where I have a problem. I don't like to repeat, specifically not on the same day. That just feels like work again. And as I always go on, it's so important for me that this is a pleasure, and nothing that feels controlled or contrived or predictable. I mean, I don't know they're going to work, and I don't always know exactly how I'm going to go about them. And all I know is I'm doing it now, and I'm not going to stop until they're finished. And there's a sort of exercising quality to that. You know, it feels sporty, if that makes any intellectual sense. It's like you're playing a game of football and you have to go for it. It's like you're running a race and the starting gun is gone. You know, it's all about action. It's all about doing it and doing it now. And if thinking helps, then think. And if thinking gets in the way, then stop thinking, just react. Either way, you're not slowing down. You're not going to get in the way of yourself. You're not going to trip yourself up. You're going for it in a completely committed kind of way. And once it's finished, obviously, yes, as always, we will have learned. But once it's finished, you can look back and say, yeah, okay, I would have done that differently now. Or if I'd taken a bit more time, I would have thought about this. Do you want to see the errors in the drawing? Shall I point them out to you? The tower does what I call a banana line, which means it bends slightly to the right. That's because I'm a right-handed drawer. So when I draw a straight line, sometimes it will bend. So the tower actually does a little bit of a curve, which is kind of annoying. But more annoying is the windows which are on the tower. If you look at the two at the top, and then the two in the middle, and then the two at the bottom, they don't line up. I've done each of those two windows separately, and as you can see, they should obviously line up. And actually, they don't quite, because I wasn't thinking precise enough. They're not far off, but far off enough that will be the thing that annoyed me. And I'd go back and do it again at some other point, and I'll get that bit right. So here's the final piece. I think it's got some energy to it, and it's all really down to the colour and the speed of the marks. So if you've been listening to the end, thank you so much. I will see you next time.